There is a concern that lives quietly in the minds of a remarkable number of men, a concern that most never speak aloud, that rarely surfaces in medical consultations, and that many men carry for decades without ever receiving a single piece of genuinely accurate information about it. That concern is whether their size is enough. Whether their body, in this specific and deeply personal dimension, measures up to some standard they have been carrying around since adolescence. Whether women notice, compare, and judge. If that concern is familiar to you, I want to say something directly before we go any further. You are not unusual. You are not weak, and you have almost certainly been misled by a combination of cultural myth, adolescent environment, and media representation that has nothing to do with the clinical reality of what women actually want and what actually produces sexual satisfaction. Today, I am going to give you that clinical reality, clearly, completely, and with the evidence to support it. Not to reassure you in a vague, consoling way that avoids the specifics, but to give you the actual data, the actual anatomy, and the actual psychological and relational picture that the research consistently reveals. I am Dr. Julia Rhodes, a men's sex therapist with over a decade of experience working with different couples and helping men regain their sexual health and strength back. In my clinical practice, size anxiety is one of the most consistently present concerns among men I work with, particularly men over 50. It is also one of the areas where the gap between what men believe and what the research actually shows is most dramatic. And closing that gap, replacing the mythology with accurate information, is something I consider one of the most genuinely useful things I can do for the men who come to me. Before we get into the content, please subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications if you have not already. Every week, I publish evidence-based content designed to give men the honest, clinically grounded guidance on sexual and relational health that they deserve. Share this video with a man you care about who might benefit from hearing this. And now, let us get into it. Part 1. How size anxiety is created and why it persists. Before we look at the data, I want to spend time on a question that I think is important and that is rarely asked. Where did your belief that your size might be inadequate come from? What was the source of that information? Because understanding the origin of a belief is often the first step toward evaluating whether that belief deserves the weight you have been giving it. For the vast majority of men, the first encounters with the idea that size matters came not from medical or scientific sources, but from one of three places: locker room culture in adolescence, peers and jokes, and pornographic or sexualized media content. Locker room culture in adolescence is an environment almost uniquely ill-suited to accurate information about anything. It is an environment governed by social dominance, peer comparison, and the anxiety of young people who have almost no accurate information about bodies, development, or sexuality, and are compensating for that anxiety with performance and bravado. The information transmitted in that environment about what women want, what constitutes an adequate body, and how men should think about themselves is not only inaccurate, it is systematically distorted in the direction of anxiety and inadequacy. Yet it lodges in the developing mind with extraordinary persistence, precisely because of the emotional charge and social significance of the context in which it arrives. Pornographic content is, as I have discussed in other videos, designed for entertainment and commercial purposes, not as education. The selection criteria for performers in pornographic content are not representative of the population. They are, by definition, at the extreme ends of the distribution for any physical attribute that is commercially valued. Comparing one's own body to the bodies of pornographic performers is the equivalent of comparing one's own height to the height of professional basketball players and concluding that one is abnormally short. The comparison is not between a normal body and an average body. It is between a normal body and a highly selected extreme. And yet, this is precisely the comparison that most men, having received no alternative reference point, are implicitly making. The persistence of these early impressions is not a sign of weakness or irrationality. It is a feature of how the human brain processes information received during emotionally charged, socially significant developmental periods. Impressions formed in adolescence about the self, the body, and social acceptability are encoded with a depth and durability that factual information encountered in adulthood often struggles to match. The belief, "I may not be enough," that formed at 14 does not dissolve when a man learns at 45 that the average erect penis length measured in clinical studies is 5 to 5.5 inches. The factual information may be intellectually accepted, while the emotional belief persists unchanged. Understanding this is the starting point for genuinely addressing size anxiety, rather than simply obtaining reassurance. Reassurance is not education, and for most men, it does not produce lasting relief. What produces lasting relief is a thorough and honest reckoning with where the belief came from, what evidence actually shows, what female anatomy and physiology actually require, and what genuinely drives sexual satisfaction in real, intimate relationships. That is what I am providing today. Part 2. What the research actually shows. Let me give you the data clearly, because the data is both more straightforwardly reassuring and more interesting than most presentations of it. The most rigorous, large-scale study of penile dimensions, published in the British Journal of Urology International in 2015, compiled data from over 15,000 men and measured erect length using a standardized method by healthcare professionals rather than self-report. The findings showed that the average erect penile length was approximately 5.2 inches, with 95% of the men measured falling between 3.9 and 6.3 inches. These are clinical measurements, not self-reported estimates, which means they are not subject to the well-documented pattern of men overestimating their own dimensions in self-report studies. The distribution is important. It is a normal distribution, meaning that the vast majority of men cluster around the average, with progressively fewer men at the extremes in either direction. The pornographic representation of penile size, which functions as many men's primary reference point for normal, is drawn from a highly selected extreme of this distribution. It no more represents the average man's body than the exceptional athlete represents the average person's physical capacity. Now, let us turn to what women actually report when asked about size preferences in research settings, meaning anonymously, without partner presence, and without the social pressures that distort responses in other contexts. Multiple studies across different populations have examined women's stated preferences. The consistent finding is that the majority of women who express a preference describe preferences that cluster around average dimensions, and that a substantial proportion of women report that size is not a significant factor in their sexual satisfaction at all. Extreme size, specifically penises substantially larger than average, are described by a significant proportion of women not as more pleasurable, but as potentially uncomfortable or painful. This finding contradicts the popular male assumption that more is universally better, and it does so in a direction that most men have never considered. The assumption that larger is always preferable is itself a male-centric projection, rather than an accurate reflection of female experience. Critically, when women in these studies are asked to rank the factors that most contribute to their sexual satisfaction, size ranks consistently and substantially below factors including emotional connection, partner attentiveness, communication quality, duration of foreplay, and the sense of feeling safe and genuinely desired. This finding is robust. It replicates across studies, populations, and methodologies. The factors that most powerfully drive female sexual satisfaction are not physical dimensions. They are relational and attitudinal qualities that every man, regardless of his anatomy, has the capacity to develop and offer. Part 3. The anatomy of female pleasure and why it matters for this conversation. To genuinely understand why size has been so significantly overstated as a determinant of female pleasure, you need to understand the anatomy of female sexual response. And the key anatomical fact is this: the vast majority of the nerve endings responsible for sexual pleasure in women are located in the external genitalia and the outer portion of the vaginal canal, not in the deeper internal regions. The clitoris, which I have discussed in detail in other videos, contains approximately 8,000 sensory nerve endings, concentrated in a structure that is partially external and partially internal, with the internal portions lying in close proximity to the outer third of the vaginal canal. These are the nerve endings most directly involved in producing female orgasm and intense sexual pleasure, and they are stimulated most effectively not by deep penetration, but by contact with and stimulation of the external clitoris and the inner vaginal structures in the outer portion of the canal. The deeper portions of the vaginal canal contain relatively few sensory nerve endings. Deep penetration, in the absence of adequate arousal and the physical changes arousal produces, does not produce intense pleasure for most women, and can produce discomfort or pain for many women, particularly as hormonal changes with age reduce tissue elasticity and natural lubrication. This anatomical reality directly contradicts the assumption embedded in much male size anxiety, which is that greater length produces greater penetration, which produces greater pleasure. The evidence does not support that chain of assumptions. There is also the important matter of circumference. When women in research studies are asked specifically about dimensions, those who express any preference more commonly cite girth as somewhat more relevant to their experience than length, for the anatomical reason that girth increases contact with the nerve-rich outer vaginal walls and external structures. But even this finding must be placed in proper context. The expressed preferences cluster around average dimensions in terms of circumference as well as length, and the overwhelming majority of women in the same studies identify non-anatomical factors as more important to their satisfaction than any physical measurement. What produces deep female pleasure anatomically is not length. It is the quality and attentiveness of stimulation directed at the nerve-rich structures of the external genitalia and the outer vaginal canal, combined with a level of arousal sufficient for the physical changes of arousal to have occurred fully. The man who is attentive to these structures, who takes the time required for arousal to develop, and who remains present and responsive throughout the intimate encounter, is providing something infinitely more valuable than any physical dimension can offer. Part 4. the physiology of size anxiety, and how it directly undermines performance. Here is the physiological reality that most men have never had explained to them, and it is one of the most clinically important things I can tell you about this topic. Anxiety about size does not simply affect how you feel about yourself. It directly and measurably impairs the very aspects of your sexual function that most contribute to a partner's satisfaction. When the mind is occupied with anxious self-monitoring during intimacy, the brain's threat response system activates. The sympathetic nervous system becomes dominant. Cortisol and adrenaline enter the bloodstream, and these stress hormones have a direct and well-documented physiological effect on erectile function. They cause the smooth muscle of the penile arteries to contract, reducing blood flow to the erectile tissue, and actively working against the achievement and maintenance of erection. In other words, the very anxiety about whether you are adequate is producing the physiological conditions under which you are most likely to experience the reduced erectile quality that you are anxious about. The anxiety creates its own evidence, and the more significant the anxiety, the more consistently this physiological loop operates, creating a pattern in which the man's doubts about his adequacy are regularly and seemingly confirmed by his own body's stress response, when the actual underlying cause is the anxiety rather than anything anatomical. For men over 50, this loop is particularly consequential because erection quality in this age group is already more sensitive to the effects of stress hormones, reduced arterial elasticity, and the sympathetic nervous system activation that anxiety produces. The men most likely to experience the physiological effects of size anxiety most acutely are precisely the men in the age group most likely to be dealing with this concern in its most persistent form. The corrective to this loop is not physical. It is cognitive and attitudinal. It begins with replacing the inaccurate beliefs that are driving the anxiety with accurate information, exactly the kind I am providing today. And it continues with the deliberate practice of shifting attention during intimacy away from self-monitoring and toward genuine presence with the partner. The man who is fully present with his partner, genuinely attentive to her responses and her experience, curious about what she is feeling and responsive to what she communicates, is not only having a more emotionally connected, intimate encounter. He is operating from a neurological state, parasympathetic dominance, in which his body is physiologically best positioned to function well. Part 5. What genuinely matters for sexual satisfaction over 50. I want to address directly the experience of men over 50, because the relationship between age, sexual function, and satisfaction has its own specific characteristics that deserve honest and specific attention. Aging brings genuine changes to male sexual function. Erections typically take longer to develop and may require more direct stimulation than they did in earlier decades. The angle of erection may change. Recovery time between erections increases. Ejaculatory force and intensity may change. Orgasmic sensation may shift. None of these changes are signs of failure, decline, or inadequacy. They are the predictable, universal adaptations of a male body moving through time, and they are navigable. What the research on sexual satisfaction in older couples consistently shows is that these physiological changes do not determine the quality of the intimate life. What determines the quality is the relational context in which sexuality is experienced. the quality of communication, the degree of emotional safety and genuine desire, the willingness to adapt and explore rather than measuring the present against an idealized past, and the degree to which both partners remain genuinely curious and attentive to each other's experience. Many couples report that their intimate lives genuinely improve in their 50s and 60s compared to earlier decades, not because the physiology improves, but because the relational quality does. The urgency and performance pressure that characterize much of younger men's sexuality gives way, in the best cases, to a more patient, more communicative, more mutually focused intimacy that produces deeper satisfaction for both partners. This shift is available to every couple who approaches it with openness rather than grief. I also want to address specifically the experience of men over 50 who are single or dating, because size anxiety in that context carries its own particular weight. The concern that a new partner will judge or be disappointed is real and understandable. But the evidence consistently shows that the partners most worth having are not making the evaluations that size-anxious men fear. Confidence, warmth, attentiveness, and genuine interest in a partner's experience are the qualities that create attraction and satisfaction in real, intimate relationships. A man who enters a new intimate connection with those qualities, and with the genuine self-acceptance that comes from replacing myth with accurate information, creates a completely different experience than a man who enters it with preoccupying self-doubt. The quality of his presence is the thing she will remember. For men over 50 who are managing chronic health conditions, it is also worth stating clearly that conditions including hypertension, diabetes, elevated cholesterol, and sleep apnea are among the most significant contributors to changes in erectile quality in this age group, and that managing these conditions medically and through lifestyle change has more effect on erectile quality than any preoccupation with anatomy. If you are experiencing significant or worsening changes in erectile function, a conversation with your doctor about cardiovascular health, hormonal health, and medication effects is considerably more clinically relevant than any anxiety about dimensions. Part 6. 5 practical steps that actually improve sexual satisfaction. Let me close with the specific, evidence-based guidance that I give to the men I work with who are navigating these concerns. The first is to address your cardiovascular health with genuine seriousness. Erections are fundamentally a vascular event. The quality and reliability of your erectile function is above all else a reflection of the health of your arteries and the efficiency of blood flow in your pelvic region. Regular aerobic exercise, management of blood pressure and cholesterol, weight management, and the elimination of smoking are the most powerful interventions available for erectile quality, and they are available to every man, regardless of anatomy. The second is to prioritize sleep consistently. Sleep is the most important recovery and hormonal regulation tool available to you. Testosterone production, nervous system restoration, cortisol regulation, and the vascular health of the penile tissue all depend on adequate, regular, quality sleep. Men who are sleeping poorly are operating their entire sexual health system in a compromised state. The third is to manage chronic stress actively rather than passively. Chronic stress maintains the sympathetic nervous system activation that directly impairs erectile function and reduces the quality of every aspect of intimate experience. Regular physical activity, time outdoors, social connection, meditation or breathing practices, and the deliberate cultivation of purposeful activity are all evidence-based stress reduction tools with direct relevance to sexual health. The fourth, and in my clinical experience, the most immediately impactful for intimate relationships, is to open genuine communication with your partner about your intimate life. Many couples, particularly those who have been together for many years, have never had a direct, honest, non-defensive conversation about what each person most enjoys, what they would like more of, and what they find less satisfying. The assumptions that fill the absence of this conversation are consistently less accurate and more anxiety-provoking than the conversation itself. Creating the conditions for this conversation, approaching it with genuine curiosity rather than defensiveness, and receiving whatever she shares with openness and appreciation transforms the intimate dynamic in ways that no physical change ever could. The fifth is to stop measuring your real body against unrealistic representations in pornographic or other sexualized media content. The bodies depicted in that content are not representative of real populations. They are commercially selected extremes. The intimate encounters depicted there do not reflect the anatomy, the physiology, or the relational dynamics of real intimate relationships between real people. Using that content as a reference point for what is normal, adequate, or desirable is not just inaccurate. It is actively and consistently harmful to your self-perception and your intimate life. I want to close with something that I have said to many men in my clinical work, and that I want you to genuinely hear. The anxiety you carry about whether your body is enough has almost nothing to do with your body, and almost everything to do with the information environment you grew up in, and the inaccurate beliefs that environment deposited in you over years of exposure to distorted representations. Those beliefs can be examined. They can be tested against evidence, and they can, with real information and real support, be replaced with an understanding of yourself and your body that is accurate, generous, and genuinely liberating. I have worked with men who have spent 30 years carrying a belief about their inadequacy that dissolved within a single honest conversation about what the research actually shows and what female anatomy and physiology genuinely require. Not because the conversation changed their anatomy, but because it changed their understanding. And that change in understanding, from myth to evidence, from distorted comparison to accurate context, transformed how they showed up in their intimate relationships in ways that their partners noticed and valued immediately. The men who let go of size anxiety and replace it with genuine presence, curiosity, and attentiveness become better lovers. Not because their anatomy changed, but because their attention shifted from self-monitoring to genuine connection. That shift is available to every man who chooses it, and it is available right now. Sexual satisfaction across decades of research is shaped by connection, attentiveness, presence, communication, and care. Those are qualities of character and relationship, not of anatomy. They are qualities you can develop, strengthen, and offer to your partner regardless of anything else. They are, in the end, what makes the difference, not measurements. You deserve to feel comfortable in your body at every stage and every age. You deserve to experience intimacy without the distraction of self-doubt that was never based in reality to begin with. And you deserve accurate information that supports your well-being rather than undermining it. I hope today's video has provided that. If today's video gave you something that genuinely shifts how you think about your own body and your own intimate life, please do 3 things right now. Hit the like button because it helps more men find this content when they most need it. Leave a comment below and tell me what part of today's conversation resonated most with you. And please subscribe with notifications on if you have not already. I am Dr. Julia Rhodes. I will see you on the next one.